I am Emily Pennington. I run Park Street University for Park Street, and I'm going to introduce the next panel. It's called Standing Out from the Crowd, Industry Success Stories. And we have a really heavy hitter lineup here today that I'm excited about. We have Marshall Dawson, partner and CEO of Jardesca and Deviate Marketing. We have Robert Furniss, co-founder of Samson in Surrey. We have Billy Erickson, the global sales manager for Tequila Fortaleza. And Britt West, the Vice President and General Manager of Spirits for E&J Gallo Winery. And with that, I'm going to get off stage and hand it over to Marshall.
I'm going to quickly dive into a couple things, kind of introducing the idea of standing out to the crowd from the crowd. And then I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of things that I've been through in my sort of 30 years in this industry. And then each of our panelists are going to go through and do the same. Before I do that, how many people are either started a brand or thinking about starting a brand? How many are in the on-trade or bar side, distributor side, agency side? I see a lot of people raising their hands multiple times. You're like me. So you started a brand and you're on the agency side and you like to drink. Okay, good to know. All right. Before I dive into my piece, one of the things we're going to talk about today is, I don't know if you guys can read this, but this says, tradition, just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. So, and that's the running of the bulls, and I'm not judging whether the running of the bulls is stupid or not. It is incredibly dangerous. But the point is that a lot of times people say, well, that's the way we've done it. And if people in this industry said that, then you wouldn't have the show that you have here. So it's pretty amazing, and I think that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about with standing out from the crowd. There's a very famous professor named Philip Kotler in America. He teaches at Kellogg Institute. He's written about 50 books. And he said, marketing is differentiation. To ignore this would be to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think the way we brought that over to this seminar today is that building a brand ultimately comes down to whether it can stand out in, reinvent, or create its own category. He also said that too much marketing today is what he said is 1P marketing, the traditional 4 Ps. Companies mainly concentrate on promotion and sales and disregard product, price, and place and distribution, all of which are imperative if you want to stand out from the crowd. And because they do that, it results in ineffective marketing. So obviously, the traditional 4 Ps, product, promotion, place, and price, somewhere in there, if you're a brand person like I've been for a very long time, brand encompasses all of this. I think the important thing to be thinking about, Philip Kotler said it, not me, is there are 4 Ps. So if you're starting a brand or you're running a brand or you're thinking about something like that, you want to be looking at all 4 of these. And that's what you're going to hear from the panelists today, because each one of them has done different pieces of that in different brands. I think one of the interesting things about differentiation, though, that I've learned over the years, and it's been especially true as I've started my own brand, is that somewhere there's a balance and there's a watch out here between having nothing different and having everything be different. Because if everything's different, your trade, your consumers, even your distributors can't understand what it is that you're trying to sell or market. And so that's been a really interesting thing, like I said, even as not only for the brands I've worked on, so we like to call that familiar with a twist. So that's kind of an intro to the entire panel. I'm going to tell you guys a couple stories about brands I've worked on, and then each of the panelists will do the same. I have Deviate Marketing as well as Jardesca, which is my California aperitif. And when we started Deviate, we passed out the magic 8 balls. I don't, have you guys ever seen that toy? You ask it a question and you shake it and it tells you the answer. Well, in theory, it does. All we can really do is ask the right questions, and so that's what we're trying to do today. So I don't know if you've ever seen Mr. Peabody. You guys, that might be a very quintessentially American thing, but they have what's called the Wayback Machine. So we're going to go on the Wayback Machine for a minute. We're going to talk about gin many years ago. Gin 1991. Who was alive in 1991? I know there's some people that weren't. Oh, good. All right. So that's good. Because a lot of times when we do this talk, people are looking at me like I wasn't born yet. So I don't know if you noticed, there's a few gins here. Did you guys notice that? I think I stopped counting at about 50. But in 1991, gin was, you have to imagine a world where gin was in a round green bottle. It was juniper based. It was about the Union Jack and fundamentally British and English imagery. bowlers and old men, and really all the drinking was gin and tonic, nothing else. But along came this guy named Michel Roux. Anybody ever heard of Michel Roux? He's kind of an important guy in the industry. If you've never heard of him, he's kind of interesting to read up about. And he realized you could coat a bottle with a blue coating. And he had a brand called Bombay Original, which is still out there. And he decided to launch a brand called Bombay Sapphire. Well, Bombay Sapphire was square, and it was blue, and it wasn't juniper dominant, and it broke all the rules of gin, so much so that people were kind of saying, I don't really get what you're doing. The other thing was that it was vapor infused. So if you imagine boiled vegetables versus steamed vegetables, that's the best way to do it. So traditional gin is bathtub gin, it's boiled, right? They use vapor infusion. Well, the result of that was an incredibly light, delicate gin that wasn't like traditional gins. And because you had that light, delicate gin, their entire focus was martinis. And so it was amazing that all of the marketing was around martini. Now, how do people drink gin generally in the world? Anybody know the huge amount of consumption, what it's in? It's changed, but it's still the biggest amount. Gin and tonic. 80% of the consumption of Bombay Sapphire was gin and tonic. All of their imagery was martini. Everything they did was martini. They never did a gin and tonic ad. Why? Because everyone knows you drink gin with tonic. So why would you do a gin and tonic ad, right? So that's one of the things we're talking about with conventional wisdom. You don't need to tell people you drink gin and tonic. You need to tell people your product is so amazing that the only way you should drink it is in martinis. And all of their imagery and all their advertising was martinis. But it went better than that. It went into creativity. So anybody that was alive when Bombay Sapphire was not only in its heyday, but now understands that Bombay Sapphire isn't just a gin. It's a lifestyle brand. So much so that Bombay Sapphire could participate in the Salone di Mobile in Italy and have a stand of designer martini glasses from all over the world, and nobody looked at it and said, how can you be here? And I always thought, as the guy that was running Bombay Sapphire and I only did it for 3 years globally, but we had great growth, and it was in the heyday of that. I always thought, what right do we have to be at the Salone di Mobile? And yet it was a lifestyle brand. And that was part of that challenging conventional wisdom. So you get the rational side and the emotional side. And then ultimately, and this is something you can do if you're working on a brand or you're starting a brand or something else, you lay out, remember we talked about all the 4 Ps? You put the 4 Ps out, you look at price, you look at promotion, whatnot. This is charting traditional gin versus Bombay Sapphire. And this is a great way for you to think about what your product and brand is doing versus what else is going on in the industry or the category. The result of that is this was gin. Remember, we're in 1991, and then 20 years later. That was gin from 1991 to 2007. That was the gin market. I know that's hard to believe now. If you think about what's happened in the gin in the past decade, that was Bombay Sapphire in the same time period. It doubled. It went to almost 2 million cases. And what's crazy is I haven't worked on Bombay Sapphire in over a decade, and I looked it up, and now it's knocking on 4 million cases. So it's pretty amazing when you get that differentiation right, that familiar with the twist, what you can do. The next one that I was going to talk about, and I'm going to do this one in just one very quick slide, but Grey Goose Vodka, another fascinating story to me. Anybody know what the line was that Grey Goose was built on? Britt knows this. What was it, Britt?
World's best tasting vodka.
The world's best tasting vodka. What's the legal definition of vodka? Who knows? What is it? Tasteless, odorless, flavorless spirit. Tasteless, odorless, flavorless spirit. What was it built on?
World's best tasting vodka.
World's best tasting vodka. I got a great idea. You know why it worked? Because a guy named Sidney Frank, who created Grey Goose, had the guts and the wherewithal, who was an entrepreneur, yeah, he had a company behind him, to say, I'm going to build a brand in a category that is defined by colorless, tasteless, odorless spirit. I'm going to build a brand that is the world's best tasting vodka. And Bacardi bought it from Sidney Frank for $2.2 billion. Actually, it was more than that because there was an earn out on the end. So it was probably $2.5 billion or something. But if you think about challenging conventional wisdom, vodka is cheap. A premium vodka is like $20. It's from Russia and Poland. It's made out of potatoes. It's cold. It's not warm. And you're going to go to distributors and give them about 15% margin, maybe 20. Colorless, tasteless, odorless. Grey Goose, well-made, luxury. It went out at 30, came from France, wheat, approachable imagery, and they decided to go to distributors with higher margins, which is all part of the standing out, all the way through the 4 Ps, right? The other interesting thing about Grey Goose, and this is important for all of you in a show like this, is it was a failure for the first 3 or 4 years. They relaunched it twice. So for all the people that want to go back and talk about how wonderful Grey Goose was, and after a decade, Sidney Frank sold it for $2.2 billion, they went through all the same things every entrepreneur goes through, which is, can we make this work? We got to redo it. The last one that I'm going to talk about real briefly is my brand that I created called Jardesca California Aperitiva. I wouldn't be a brand guy if I didn't have the bottle here to show you. So this is Jardesca. It's a California aperitif. We did the same thing when we were launching Jardesca. Obviously, many of you are from Europe. You know what aperitifs are. Americans do not really know what aperitifs are. They're finally starting to get it. Traditional aperitifs, a lot of them use artificial flavors and colors. They weren't all natural. They tend to be now mass-produced. They aren't small. They've been around for hundreds of years. A lot of them use secondary or burnt wines, right? So the leftover wine. The traditional aperitifs, that's how they made them and made them cost-effective, and it was a way to actually create aperitifs. They also add grain spirit or flavored syrups, cane sugar, and they're primarily cocktail ingredients. And in Europe, it's a pre-dinner moment, right? That's where everybody drinks aperitifs. The real takeaway is we decided to create a quintessentially Californian-style aperitif. So fresh, refreshing, all-natural, wine-based, a marriage of the vineyards and the gardens. We blend 3 California wines with a botanical enlivened spirit, completely differentiated from the traditional European aperitifs. But this is familiar with a twist. How do people drink it? What's the global basis of aperitifs now? It's the spritz is on fire. So we do the Jardesca California spritz. The difference is that we use fresh combinations of garnishes that really react with Jardesca because it's so natural. And the result for us has been the same kind of response that we would have written if we could when we were starting Jardesca, which is, this is summer in a glass, balanced dry, and inspired by the sense of summer. It's high time for a local alternative to French aperitifs and other aperitifs. So the good news is we got out there, exciting differentiation. I'll still say as an entrepreneur, you got to stick in there because that's why I told you about Grey Goose, right? And Bombay Sapphire is a whole different story, but Grey Goose, again, was like, how long is this going to take?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Billy Erickson. I'm the sales manager for Tequila Fortaleza. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what standing out looks like from my perspective. And I kind of have a couple buckets here that we're going to go through, which is 1, the physicality of it, 2, your processes within your own business, 3, your team, and then 4, your story. So I felt that these were very tactical things that we could talk about here that are going to be advice for you guys when you're thinking about what your bottle looks like, what your POS looks like, what kind of systems am I using internally in my business, then who am I going to hire when you have enough revenue to bring somebody on? Why should you pick somebody? You need to pick somebody, how you pick somebody, and then finally, what story am I selling when I'm in a bar? What am I telling? What am I communicating here? So physically standing out. Well, picture on the left here, I want to look at our bottle, which is right up here with the little agave on top. That's one of our key identifiers. It's been copied by a couple people now because people are picking up that when people are in a bar, they spot our top. I can't tell you how many of my friends have looked across a bar. They see, oh, that's the Fortaleza top. Oh, Billy, when I'm in a bar, I always look for your guys' top to see if they see you. But there's a couple other things as well on the bottle that I want to talk about standing out, which is the squareness. You see a lot of round bottles up there, and the height. When we actually first came to market, a lot of the bottles that were out in the tequila market at the time were short, round. They took up a lot of shelf space. When my dad was designing our bottle, we actually went through probably 8 or so designs before he settled on this one. 1, this was hand blown. 2, it was the opposite of all the other bottles that were out there. Thinking the short, squat Patron bottle, the short, squat Don Julio bottle, all, looking at our competitive set here and then saying, okay, what are they doing? Let's do something else. So then the second, this is our stand. And this is kind of difficult for you guys to see, but in the background, everybody else at this tasting is in tables that are about waist height 3 feet across. I can't tell you how many feathers we ruffled when we would bring this gigantic bar setup into our distributors' trade tasting shows. It took them about a year and a half to get used to it. We have to constantly remind them, hey, we don't need a table. We're going to bring our own. And the question is, why do we do this? Well, you can see we're literally separating ourselves from the competition. At a tasting like this, where a customer is going to come in and they're going to taste through 20 or 30 different products in an afternoon, you need something that really is going to catch their memory in addition to just the product. So I can't tell you here with how much, compliments we've gotten on this bar. Wow, this bar is so cool. How did you guys make this? And I love telling a story. Well, my dad handmade the first one himself. This was his brainchild of an idea here. We wanted to really separate ourselves. We want to give people this Mexico experience. We want them to feel as if for a moment they've stepped out of the, sterile BCB room and into our distillery in Mexico, where we've got, bright colors, the cantina sign, nice old wooden stain, with a good stain on it, so they feel like they're being transported out of there. And it's going to create a brand memory for them that's a positive experience. When you're going to market, think about what is your POS communicating? What's the feel behind it? What is your bottle communicating? What brand values are you communicating? Our POS has continued to do really very well because my dad hired, we'll come to this in a moment here, a stellar marketing sort of genius. His name's Stefano Francavilla. Stefano is one of our key people on our team. He's able to consistently come up with POS that gives the brand a feeling that just other brands do not have. The materials feel different. He's giving something a physical touch to the brand that other people don't have and can't copy. Now, second, this is a very boring list, and I apologize for using this slide, but I wasn't sure how to communicate the process other than this. This is a sample list of distributors in California. So you can see here's about 12 of them. These are people who have licenses to distribute from a legal perspective to bars, restaurants, retail locations in the state of California. Now, some of these are wineries, which you would have to look up or know, like Chateau Diana. And what I want to communicate here with this is a lot of brands, when they come to market, will go to Southern. They'll go to the biggest distributor they can find, thinking, okay, here's a big distributor. This is going to be great. They're going to pick up my product. I'm going to provide some incentive money. We're going to get a bunch of placements, and this is going to be great. We're going to kickstart our product. And it goes great for about 2 months. They burn through a bunch of incentive money. They burn through thousands of dollars. You're on every shelf in the business. And then 2 months later, you're gone. Where did your brand go? The incentive money was gone. Southern has other priorities to worry about. You need to have a really well-executed brand if you're going to do that. You need to have a lot of money. And for a lot of us in this room here, you look at how many small brand stands are. That's a challenging aspect, So if you are in that position, it can work out really well. We've seen Casamigos has done really well in his example with Southern. They had significant investors, though. And so for us, that wasn't going to be our route to market. That was going to be challenging for us. We started looking at what distributors are going to fit with our business model. How do we process this? What are we looking for in a distribution relationship? Where are the accounts that we're trying to hit? And that process evolved into essentially calling, I think this bar is going to want to carry us. Let's call them and ask them where they think we would be a good fit at. And that's how we begun selecting distributors, is calling ahead, investigating the market, finding out where we want to be in that market, and then executing on that. Because you can't come in and look and go, that worked for Casamigos, it's going to work for me. You have to think about how this process is going to support your packaging and your branding, and they're going to be very related. So this is actually some excerpts from our Facebook pages here that we've gotten tagged in. And I know it's kind of an odd thing to show, right? But if you start reading these mementos here, this is a 10 photo notification. The other one is a guy thanking us for delivering some bottles to his wedding, which is just a few bottles, but it makes a big statement. And how is this related to the team? Well, if you're picking the right people, they're going to create the right experiences with your brand. You want to make sure you pick people that fit with your brand image, one. Two, you want to pick people that are going to leave your customers with a good feeling at the end of the day. And they're going to leave them with a good feeling not only about their brand, but about that person as a person. And that can be really challenging. You know, I walk past some of the stands here and you see people who are very flat, they're not interactive. Somebody didn't do a good job picking a salesperson. You know, you have to have that mentality, but you also want the people to be unique. You want to pick people that are going to really stand out, because as soon as your ambassador walks out of the door of a bar or restaurant, another one's going to come in. You know, as soon as I leave, Robert's sales guys are right behind me coming in, telling them about Mezcal Vago. You know, similar vein, but still, think about how many brands are going to come in after you and try and push your product right back off the shelf. So your team is so critical to not only your brand identity, but your brand identity is also going to be driven by your team. As we were talking about with our example of Stefano earlier, he's helped define our whole marketing experience. So hope that made sense. Now, lastly, I want to cover, we've been very lucky. Our story is an embarrassment of riches. My family started making tequila in the 1870s, which is an amazing history to be able to tell. We had a beautiful little distillery that was left to us, which is another key facet of our story that we're able to tell. But in addition to just the family history, I've highlighted here, this is our Taona, and this is a process story that we're using to tell how we're making it differently than other people are doing it. And then on top of that, my dad and I work together. We're the management at our company, and that's us right there with my dad's dog. And so it's a very human story to it. But just think about, this is three aspects of a story that I'm going to tell somebody, or that I'm going to be able to tell somebody. So one is this family history, the second is a father-son team, and the third is this process story. And then we're layering that on top of, we have a great team, and our process is different, so we're already selecting people different, and then layer that on top of our packaging stands out, right? So what I'm trying to communicate here is that you want to have as many levels as you can to this differentiation, but you don't want to be going in separate directions. You want to make sure that these networks all back each other up. And so in that vein, I want to talk about, if you're looking for a good example of this, Michael Porter's What is Strategy is a seminal piece of strategy in business writing. He talks about Southwest Airlines in the United States. So the airline market, very, very competitive market, right? You look at the price of gas drives how much you can charge for a ticket. There's almost no brand loyalty. Then the suppliers control a lot of it. You can only buy planes from 2 corporations, right? It's a very competitive market, very tight, not a lot of room for profit. Well, Southwest comes in, they differentiate themselves. How do they do that? They build a network of all these things that stand out differently. You look at their planes. There's no first-class service in their planes. Their planes are all the same planes, so physically, they have a key difference from their competitors. That means all their pilots are interchangeable, right? So they can move a pilot to a different plane, no problem. 2, the no first class means there's no different kind of service. Everybody's getting peanuts. They're removing the number of items that they have for a quick turnaround. Now their planes are back in the air. They're able to make more money because their planes are constantly in the air flying versus sitting on the ground, getting changed over for service. If a pilot doesn't make it, they can't fly that airplane, So it's a masterpiece, and I would encourage you to read that when you're assembling your brand.
My name's Britt West, and I'm the Vice President and General Manager of the E&J Gallery Winery. And right there and then, you should stop and say, well, this is about spirits, right? And true, but we actually do over 500 million a year in spirits. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how I think about standing out from the crowd in a large company. But I'm going to start because, like a lot of these guys, I was an entrepreneur, like many of you, a few years ago, and then my brand was ultimately sold to a larger wine supplier. I tried to say, there's many, many ways to be successful, but I'll talk about 3 that have been particularly relevant to me. One about disrupting categories. The second is about disrupting the usage occasion for our products. And then lastly, just about disrupting marketing. I'll kind of end on a funny note with one of the projects that's literally coming to fruition in the US right now. So in case you don't know, the most powerful man in the wine industry is a gentleman named Mel Dick, and he runs Southern Wine and Spirits. He runs the wine side of Southern Wine and Spirits. And when we came in, my business partners and I, we said, Mel, we happen to know him from the industry. We said, we've got this great idea. We're going to make premium sangria. And he looked at me and he said, kid, I want to save you a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of headaches. You will never sell a bottle of sangria for over $7 for a 1.5 liter jug. And one could, be just crazy enough to walk out of there and say, oh, well, then I'll just give up and go home. But we kind of took a different approach. Because what we were looking at was, we said, the category is huge. It's a big category. It's 3.5 million cases. It all sits on the bottom shelf collecting dust. It's had no money put in marketing behind it. And two competitors have 75% market share. And we looked at that and we kind of felt there is an opportunity here to premiumize it because we felt it could hit on some major trends. And those major trends were really that we were aware of what the health and wellness opportunity was going on in the United States, and that we could come out with a better tasting, better for you product. The second thing is we saw a clear route to distribution. And Billy, I think your point about route to distribution is incredibly important. If you're going to be a health and wellness product, having a company like Whole Foods behind you from the get-go was incredibly impactful for our brand. We ultimately became the number 2 selling wine SKU in all of Whole Foods, not just number 2 selling sangria. We became the number 2 selling wine in all of Whole Foods by value. And in a really quick time, with the help and the partnership of Southern Wine and Spirits, we became 45,000 cases, and we were doubling sales volume every month. That's when operational complexity started to take over, and we realized we were things that we were good at, and there were things that we were not good at. And so when a wine partner approached us to acquire the brand from us, Deutsche Family Wines and Spirits, a big company in the United States, they purchased the brand from us, and it was an incredible success that had been in market for just less than 18 months. But I think the real piece of that was disrupting categories. Categories traditionally always have some piece of it. Usually it's about 10% in the US that is premium. And we saw that this category had no premium into it. So in terms of disrupting occasions, 1/3 of all beverage alcohol is consumed during the day. And in the United States, that is dominated by the beer industry. And we've started to take a look at that and say, well, why do we allow the beer industry to have such market share of the largest occasion? Because the second largest occasion is less than half the size of the first. And so we started looking at this and kind of saying there is an opportunity, and we're not alone in looking at this, but that there was an opportunity for a highly sessionable, highly convenient, better for you, healthy alternative, less filling than beer. And that's basically what has exploded today as the hard seltzer category. To give you a sense of scale of what beer represents, for every 1% market share we take from beer, it represents a $1.1 billion business in the United States. But what we saw with the hard seltzer category coming into it was that while they basically look like vodka, kind of act like vodka, they're really a malt alternative to the beer industry. And so we sat down as a team at the Gallo Winery and said, could we actually produce a hard seltzer that was delivering with the expectations of the consumer in mind? And so with that, we introduced in May, just in time for a big summer holiday, we introduced the only hard seltzer that's made with real vodka and real juice. I can tell you the team sat and we basically thought, when we did all our projections and all our analysis, we thought basically we would end up with somewhere between a 350 and a 400,000 case brand this year. I can tell you now, at the end of September, we're on track to sell 1 million cases this year, and we think we'll sell 2.5 million next year. But it was having that differentiation going into the usage occasion and seeing what a big size of prize could look like. lastly, I just wanted to talk about disrupting the marketing. And this is one of a story of knowing when your marketing is being disrupting and really capitalizing it and realizing what you're good at again and stepping away from what you're not maybe good at. Does anybody in this room know what Barstool Sports is? Okay, a few. All right, so Barstool Sports is kind of a cultural phenomenon in that it's, if you are under 30 years old, every hand in this room would have been up. It is basically the ESPN, the sports channel, the sports marketing arm with a high degree of entertainment for young people. Just to give you a size of how big Barstool Sports is, it is the fastest growing publisher of sports content. It's the largest sports podcast. It's the third most viewed video creator and the 10th largest distributed media company in the US right now. It is bigger than the New York Times. And we had signed on with a partnership to basically be the exclusive vodka advertiser on Barstool Sports. And their largest podcast is a podcast called Spittin' Chicklets. It's kind of an entertainment show. A lot of it focuses around hockey. But the two guys, one of whose name was Ryan Whitney, were on there and they were talking about, how they like to drink New Amsterdam vodka. And Ryan Whitney said, I'm not afraid to say it, but I drink my vodka with pink lemonade. And this kind of created an enormous kind of, all the guys started riffing on him and saying, what kind of man drinks pink lemonade vodka? That's ridiculous. But by following the social media channels, we started to see that Pink Whitney, hashtag Pink Whitney, was catching on. And people were posting photos of themselves drinking vodka with pink lemonade. And so we said to ourselves, well, I don't know, maybe we'll introduce a limited time offer. We introduced Pink Whitney. And we thought, literally, all right, this is probably the dumbest idea we've ever done, right? But it's a limited thing. We'll just sell it to a bunch of hockey fans and let them have some fun with it. We'll do pink lemonade flavored vodka. And we thought, well, if we do a limited time offer, it's a big brand in the United States. Maybe we'll sell 90,000 cases if we really push it hard. Since September, we've sold out. We are out of our 90,000 cases completely. And in my 25 years of experience, I've never been part of a brand like this, where we have people tattooing themselves with Pink Whitney cocktails on their arm. There's a few U.S. distributors here in the room, so I'll say, I got this photo here in the top left, which was, I got a call from our head of our distributor in Florida who said, in my 35 years, I have never had consumers ever show up at our distributor warehouse thinking they could get the product faster if they just go to the warehouse versus waiting for it to get a retail store. We had people making love declarations to my firstborn Pink Whitney baby and cradling it like a child. This guy wrote about how he bought the last 12 bottles he could find in the entire store. We're on track to sell 300,000 cases now of it once we get back in stock by December. But it's just an example of really, we don't do any of the marketing for this. What we recognized was somebody else was connecting with the consumer in a way, and what we needed to do is actually get out of the way of the marketing. That this was their area of expertise. They knew how to be culturally relevant and connect with this 20 to 30-year-old consumer. And so it's turned out to be a great success by disrupting the marketing and not applying your own marketing and prowess to it.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. I would like to talk to you and at the same time try and give you a bit of a break because you guys must be exhausted. If you've been doing half or a third of what we've been doing today and yesterday, I'm sure you need to relax. So I'm going to try and stand out in a different way by just giving you some soothing imagery to look at, rather than 55 slides with a lot of writing. There will be a couple of slides with writing, but I think it's important to remember that we really need to think very carefully, no matter what business you're in, about how to stand out and put yourself in the consumer's shoes, because we're not the only ones that are exhausted. We may be exhausted for good reasons given what we've lived through here in the past couple of days, but it's pretty exhausting being a consumer right now, and it's pretty difficult to navigate your way through the jungle of brands, that are out there, and I don't care whether you're talking about the spirits industry or the on-premise industry. We live in a world as consumers that's overpopulated by brands clamoring for our attention. In the US alone, if you think about it, the market has a huge amount of brands just in the spirits industry. There are 14,000 brands of spirits on the market in the US, and that's just brands and not SKUs at any one time. Some come and some go. There are over 200,000 bars and restaurants carrying spirits in the US. So it's a really complicated world out there, which is why I think it's important sometimes to simplify. And one of the ways to simplify, and the first thing I'd like you guys to think about, is the power of visual imagery. The reason why that's important is because we live in a visual world, which sounds like a nonsense, but think about it. The power of sight for us as human beings is enormous. When you go to the beach and you want to find out what's going on in the water, you turn to your friends and say, I'm going to go and see how the water is. But you're not going to go and see how the water is. You're going to go and feel the water. But the power of the visual metaphor in our world is so strong that we talk and rely on sight a lot. And that in the last 20 years, with the rise of the digital age and social media, has just become ever more exacerbated. So what you are and how you express yourself has to go through imagery. And the important thing is that you need to differentiate. And there are lots of ways of standing out from the crowd, right? Here's my favorite from my youth, because yes, I was around for the first go-around of the punk rockers. If you want to stand out from a crowd, it's easy to stand out from a crowd. If differentiation is what you're all about, then there are some easy wins out there. The problem with differentiation, and the thing I want you to think about for your businesses, is differentiation needs to come with something else, and that's relevance. As my mother used to say, it's nice to be a punk rocker, but you might not want to turn up to the tea party. So you've somehow got to get to grips with both sides of the equation. On the one side, and you've seen some great examples already this afternoon, how do I stand out from the crowd? What is it that makes me different? And from the other side, how do I at the same time retain that relevancy? How do I end up in a place where I'm actually talking to people in a way that they're going to appreciate and decode and understand? It's a little bit like the balance that Marshall was talking about at the beginning. You have to have a successful brand, focus on both differentiation and relevancy. And there's a sweet spot between what you're saying and what people want to hear, and that's the sweet spot that you have to aim for. And how do you aim for it? Again, I'm trying to keep things simple. The way I like to think about successful brands in our industry is what I call the lollipop principle. What, I hear you asking, mentally at least, the hell is the lollipop principle, Robert? Well, if you want to succeed in this industry, or in most consumer-facing industries, you need a hard core of intrinsics that work and that are relevant. That's all of the stories behind the liquids, behind the products that you're making, and behind the stories that come with them. And you also need the wrapper, which is why I've got the lollipop here in two pieces. The wrapper is the emotional content. It's the stories you tell about the founder, about the people around the brand. It's everything that brings the brand to life. It's a very simple thought process, but I think if you apply it to your business, what I see out there, a lot of people carrying lollipops without the wrappers, and some people carrying wrappers without the lollipops. You need both to win in this industry. In our case, and I'll go through this very quickly just in passing, you can find inspiration for the hard part of the lollipop in almost anything. Our Widow Jane company, which has a modestly successful bourbon in the US called Widow Jane 10, uses water from our own mine in upstate New York. And that water has a very high mineral content that actually impacts the taste of the brand. And I haven't found anyone else that's doing this yet. Most people take water out of the tap, filter it, and use that to cut their whiskey. So it doesn't have to be complex, but there has to be something there in the lollipop that makes you stand out. And on the other side of this slide, we use cognac stills to make our single malt brand, Bren, which again is not necessarily particularly unusual, except that nobody else is doing it. And because we come from France and because we're made in the cognac region, we are true to the nature of spirits making in the region. And then on the wrapper, one of the examples I like to use, again, from our portfolio is Few, and one of the things that makes our Few brand successful is that emotional wrapper. And in our case, the wrapper is primarily driven by a lady on the left-hand side of the slide whose name is Frances E. Willard. Frances E. Willard was the lady who founded the Prohibition movement in the United States. If any of you have ever seen that famous black and white photograph with a bunch of very sour-looking Victorian ladies saying, "Liquor that has touched lips shall not touch ours," that's Frances E. Willard. She is a native of the same town where we make Few. She's also a cool person in her own right. She's the only woman with a statue in the rotunda of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So she's a hero to some extent, although in our industry, she's obviously, people have more mixed feelings about her. But the stories that we tell around Frances E. Willard, which are true, and because she's a native of the same city, which, by the way, was a dry city until Few came along, give us a wonderful wrapper around the reality of the product that we produce. And that's how you stand out. Shakespeare once said, and don't worry, this isn't turning into a university lecture, for those of you that are looking panicked. Shakespeare once said, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." To which we reply, yeah, but would it sell as well? If there's another thing that's fundamentally overlooked when you're starting or developing a brand in our industry, it's the name. Why is the name so important? Because we work in an industry, whether you're selling sangria or whether you're selling spirits, or whether you're in the bar industry and you want people to come to your bar, we work in an industry where consumers develop a very intimate and emotional relationship with your brand name, and they want to be able to use your brand name in public. Think about it. There are very few businesses in the world where people actually go into a public place and say your brand name out loud. It's not like I run down the corridors of Tesco's in the United Kingdom or Walmart in the US shouting out, "I'm going to buy a packet of Pampers because the baby needs some." You don't do that. But we work in an industry where people talk about our brands, where they walk into a bar and use that brand name out loud. And what's worse, they use that brand name out loud in front of a peer group that's going, "What the hell are you drinking? Why did you order that?" And what's even worse, they use it in front of professionals, like some of the professionals in this room, who are on the other side of the bar going, "So you want to order that? Okay." And they nod wisely. So the power of having the right name and the right stickiness of that name is important, because when you get to that bar and somebody says, "What are you going to have to drink?" you have about 3 seconds before you look like an idiot. You need to have brands that are memorable and that people can decode. And in our case, just to cite one example, we've seen that our brand Widow Jane is very successful because one of the reasons that it works is that it sticks as a brand name. And a final thought, just to give you something light and easy to go home with. So I haven't bombarded you with slides. I hope I've kept my promise of differentiation. But if there's one thing I want you guys to take away, it's that we're all in this industry, basically in a more or less long-term industry. Success very rarely happens overnight, which is why this industry is a little bit like dating. Bear with me. Go back to what I just said. Think about it. When you first meet someone in the human realm, generally the first thing you learn about is the name. Where does that name come from? Is that name memorable? Have I heard that name before? Am I going to remember that name? The second thing we all look at in both industries is the packaging. It's true. Then, if we like the name and we like the packaging, we tend to, at some point, sample the intrinsics in both the human realm and the beverage realm. If we like the intrinsics, we start to want to learn about the background story, and that's where the wrapper comes in. So far we've tried the intrinsics. Then we want to know what the backstory is. What's the emotional story behind this person? What's the emotional story behind this brand? What kind of company does it keep? What's the real story of its creation, its foundation, where it grew up? Very similar parallels. At some point, there occurs, and you've had some great examples today from Billy with Fortaleza, there occurs an emotional bonding for successful brands. People start to bond. They start to like each other. They start to want to spend time together. Before you know it, you may be going steady. You're probably still seeing some other people. You're certainly, in terms of brand repertoire, also drinking other things. The average consumer in the States drinks over 4 brands, and when you're younger and more experimental, it can be a lot more than that. So At some point in the process, you're going steady. And before you know it, in this long-term industry, you end up in a committed relationship. And that's what we're all aiming for. So as you go away and think about your brands and your businesses, think about modeling it on the development of a long-term relationship. We're very blessed not to be in a boring business, guys. This isn't car parts. This is beverage alcohol. And this is a very exciting industry with a very high level of consumer engagement. And that's why I encourage you to think about it in terms of dating. So my one wordy slide to summarize leaves you just 4 thoughts about how to stand out from the crowd. It's definitely too crowded out there, whichever market you look at. There is too much in the market. There is too many brands. There are too many outlets. There's too much being launched. The average consumer, just like all of you guys, if you've been around here the past couple of days, is kind of overwhelmed. In order to cut through, you need differentiation, but you also need to be relevant. And so you constantly need to be weighing those 2 things up. Don't be the punk rocker at the tea party. Make sure that you get both of those elements right. Think of your brand as having great intrinsics and great extrinsics. And if you can't remember what that's all about, just remember the lollipop in terms of the heart of the lollipop and the wrapper. And lastly, think of building a long-term relationship with your consumers, because we're in the slow-moving consumer goods business. So think about acquiring consumers as a form of dating. If you remember all of that, and God bless you if you do, you'll go far. Thank you very much.
Robert talked about the lollipop and the wrapper, and I was gonna ask each one of these guys to talk about what they think are cost of entry differentiation in this industry versus game-changing differentiation. So what do you think is, so what do you have to have if you're starting something? A lot of these people said they were starting a brand. What do you guys think you have to have versus what is something that is, like for me, world's best tasting vodka was game changing. Yeah, that's not cost of entry stuff, because that was like how you get to be a $2 billion brand, right?
I think you have to have a story, some aspect. Either you're brought to life an old distillery, you're starting a family business, you're using differentiated ingredients. I think a story is
that
absolutely
nowadays
mandatory.
is cost of entry, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a reasonable story and know how to tell it.
Yeah.
Anything else come to you guys?
I actually think it's the piece that's probably the most overlooked piece is good liquid.
The liquid.
There was a time where I think we could do things in the industry that weren't with great liquid. And now I think it's cost of entry. Your liquid better stand out.
Yeah, your liquid better do whatever it is you want it to do, have a differentiation, have some sort of not only uniqueness to it, but some benefit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was great, by the way. I hadn't heard the High Noon story. And not only that, like, I can't drink the other stuff, so I'm excited. You guys, I don't know if you know, in America, this whole hard seltzer thing is insane. And the most popular one is actually White Claw. Is anyone here from White Claw? There's no one here from White Claw? Okay, Dan Gasper is teasing me. I can't drink White Claw, so I'm being out there, standing out from the crowd, but I'm excited to try the High Noon. Did you have anything that comes to mind?
I go back to what I said earlier. I think you need to think, if you're starting a brand or nurturing a brand, think very long and hard about what you're going to call it. I see a lot of good ideas spoiled by really weird naming conventions.
Yeah.
Secondly, intrinsics are a given, particularly in the craft market. There's over 2,000 craft distilleries in the US. There's some very good products out there. There's some not so good products out there. So having quality and consistency is very important. And then never forget that this industry works on the basis of storytelling. It's what I said earlier. You're in a bar, what do? We tell each other stories. Consumers tell each other stories. They tell each other stories digitally if they like something now. It's not always face-to-face. But if you can't spark that storytelling, you're going to have a hard time selling a product.
And you mentioned stickiness. So, yes, you need the story, and then it needs to be sticky.
That's also the lollipop thing again, coming out. You see, it's all tied together.
It's all connected. Yeah. That's very good. Those are good.
So I have a question.
All right, Emily.
We called this industry success stories, but I want to flip it and ask if you can share a mistake or a hard lesson that you learned as you were building your brands.
The list for me is really long, and I recently asked a group of young marketers. I asked how many people were in the 10 million club, And that means having successfully lost $10 million on a single brand proposition. There were very few of them, but because I worked with these two guys at the time, it turns out Estonian vodka is actually not much of a real differentiator, especially when you compromise on the packaging along the way. You don't really understand what was driving kind of the underlying. It wasn't that France was the differentiator for Grey Goose. It was the taste element to it and driving that taste messaging. But yeah, 3 years, $10 million. And Rudy didn't fire me, but I went on to do good things after that. So it was a real learning experience, and I keep my first bottle of Surrey vodka on my desk all the time to remind me of like what it means when you actually don't have true differentiation, or you make compromises along the way in your liquid, your packaging, your story, whatever it could be.
I would build on that. My experience of big mistakes, of which there have been many, some of which I could tell in public, is to stay in your groove when you found it. Hold on to that golden thread. We all get bored with our products and our stories way before the consumer does, because there's so much out there. So it's so important to make sure that you grab hold of that golden thread and stick with it, and don't be attracted by new opportunities that may deposition the brand. I'll mention very briefly, we had a brand when I used to work for Bacardi called Benedictine, which in Asia was used by women who were recovering from childbirth. It was called Confinement. Rudy remembers this as well. 90% of the business was in this. Along comes a bunch of marketeers and go, hey, it'd be cool to make this a cocktail brand. Guess what? All the ladies that thought this was a medicine that you used to recover from childbirth went, huh? That doesn't make any sense anymore. And so the brand started to drop. So when you find your groove, when you find that golden thread, hold on to it with both hands and don't let go.
The quick build on that is it takes way longer than we perceive it does. That's part of the reason I told you the thing about Grey Goose. No one tells you that part of Grey Goose, by the way. When we bought Grey Goose, I was at Bacardi when we didn't buy it. I was the global brand guy. When Bacardi bought it for $2.2 billion, you went to talk to the founders. They told you the stories about how it had been teetering for 4 years, right? But nobody ever tells that story now. So it takes way longer than people think it does, way longer. The minute you think you're almost there, you're probably not there, you got to go again. And the other, which is not unlike the golden thread, is focus. I'll tell you something that I've learned really the hard way, more as an entrepreneur than I did when I was a global brand director, is pick a thing and do it. And I mean pick a thing and do it. And you would have thought I would have learned that. I told you about Bombay Sapphire, and they did martinis, right? And you'd think, oh, martinis. But you've got to really, really, really focus. And there's going to be all kinds of beautiful things that come around. And I've made that mistake many times.
Got one to add, which is the importance of your route to market and how you keep control of it. So I've seen some friends who have wanted to step away from doing the selling and doing the marketing themselves, and that is a mistake. Nobody cares more about your brand than you do. And if you give your sales control over to an agency or somebody else, they will be like, we're going to be here for you. We're going to drive this. Here's the hockey stick graph. And you're never going to see a hockey stick graph. That is absolutely not true. You know, every new account that you have to open, every new spot that you have to go into is going to be on you. You have to go in and sell it in there and follow up and build those relationships, because it's your brand, not an agency's.
Those are good closing words.